Close your eyes and imagine a world where gods walk among mortals, where ancient empires rise and crumble into dust, and where a single parasite behind your eye could be the key to saving, or destroying, everything you hold dear. Tonight we're embarking on a journey through the Forgotten Realms, from the dawn of creation to the events of Baldur's Gate 3. We'll walk through millennia of history, witness the birth and death of civilizations, and uncover the hidden threads that connect a humble adventurer to cosmic forces beyond comprehension. This isn't just about game mechanics or combat strategies. This is about the stories, the myths, the legends, the tragedies, and the triumphs that make Baldur's Gate 3 one of the richest narrative experiences in gaming. So get comfortable, relax, and let's begin our journey into the lore of Baldur's Gate 3. Before we continue, a quick note. This video contains full spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, including all companion storylines, major plot twists, and endgame revelations. If you haven't finished the game and want to experience these moments yourself, bookmark this video and return when you're ready. For everyone else, let's dive in. To understand the mind flayer parasite wriggling in your character's skull, we need to go back. Way back. To a time before Baldur's Gate, before the Sword Coast, before even the world of Toriel itself existed. In the beginning, there was the primordial chaos, a vast, formless void from which all creation would spring. From this chaos emerged two cosmic forces, Shar, the Lady of Loss, goddess of darkness and night, and her twin sister Selûne, goddess of the moon and stars. These two sisters were not enemies at first. They were complementary forces, two sides of the same cosmic coin. Shar represented the darkness, the void, the potential of nothingness. Selûne embodied light, creation, and the spark of life. Together, they existed in balance within the primordial darkness. But balance, as we'll see time and again in this story, is a fragile thing. The universe they inhabited was empty, a canvas waiting for the first brushstroke. And when that brushstroke came, it would shatter their unity forever. The catalyst for creation came from an unlikely source, other primordial entities stirring in the void, seeking to create worlds. Selûne, moved by the desire to nurture life and light, wanted to help these entities. She envisioned a cosmos filled with stars, worlds, and living beings. She saw beauty in the potential of creation. Shar disagreed. Fundamentally and violently. To Shar, the void was perfect. The darkness was pure. Any introduction of light and life would only corrupt the pristine nothingness she cherished. The emptiness wasn't something to be filled, it was something to be preserved, protected, even worshipped. Their disagreement escalated into the first cosmic battle. Sister fought sister in a conflict that would literally shape reality itself. This wasn't a war of armies or weapons. This was a battle between fundamental forces of existence. When gods of such magnitude fight, their conflict doesn't destroy matter, it creates it. From their struggle, the universe as we know it began to take form. Stars ignited in the darkness. Worlds coalesced from cosmic dust. And on one of these worlds, a planet that would come to be called Toriel, the conditions for life emerged. But the cost was terrible. Selûne, to gain the power needed to defeat her sister's darkness, tore out a portion of her own divine essence and hurled it at Shar. This essence became something new, something neither fully Selûne nor fully Shar. It became Mystiowyl, the first goddess of magic, the primordial embodiment of the weed itself. With Mystiowyl's help, Selûne managed to force Shar into a stalemate. The universe had been created. Light had been introduced into the darkness. But the enmity between the two sisters would never heal. From that day forward, Shar has sought to return existence to the void, while Selûne has protected the light that allows life to flourish. This ancient conflict reverberates through everything in Baldur's Gate 3. When you encounter Shadowheart, a devoted cleric of Shar, you're witnessing the continuation of this primordial war. Every choice she makes, every prayer she offers to the Lady of Loss, is an echo of that first conflict between darkness and light. Let's talk about Mystiowyl, Because understanding magic in the Forgotten Realms is crucial to understanding the Illithid threat, the Netherese artifacts, and ultimately the Dead Three's plans. Mystryl wasn't born in the traditional sense. She was created from the divine essence of Selûne in that first great conflict. She embodied magic in its rawest, most primal form. The weave, the fundamental force that allows mortals to access magical energy, is her legacy, though she herself would die and be reborn multiple times throughout history. Think of the weave as a cosmic tapestry that overlays all of reality. Every spell cast, every magical artifact created, every divine miracle performed, all of it touches the weave. It's not just a tool, it's a living, responsive network of magical energy that permeates everything. But here's what makes the weave so important to our story. It can be manipulated, damaged, even destroyed. And when it is, the consequences are catastrophic. Throughout history, various civilizations have tried to control or exploit the weave. The most notorious of these was Netheril, a human empire we'll discuss in detail soon. Their hubris in manipulating the weave directly led to one of the greatest magical catastrophes in history, an event that created deserts where lush lands once stood and left scars on reality itself. This is relevant because in Baldur's Gate 3, you're dealing with artifacts and magic from that era. The Netherese artifacts you encounter aren't just powerful items, they're fragments of a civilization that played with forces they couldn't fully comprehend. When Gale, one of your companions, reveals that he has a Netherese orb of destruction lodged in his chest, he's not just telling you he has a magical problem. He's telling you he's carrying a piece of one of history's greatest disasters within his own body. As Toril took shape and life began to flourish, more gods emerged. Some, like Shar and Selûne, were primordial forces given consciousness. Others were elevated from mortals who achieved divine power. And some came from beyond Toril entirely, attracted by the growing faith and worship of the world's inhabitants. The pantheon of the Forgotten Realms is vast and complex, but several gods are particularly relevant to our story. Mystra, evolved from Mystryl, is the goddess of magic, the guardian of the weave. She's died and been reborn multiple times, and her presence, or absence, dramatically affects the nature of magic itself. Gale's story is intimately tied to Mystra, as he was not just a devotee but a lover of the goddess, chosen as one of her most gifted mortal wizards. Baal, the Lord of Murder, is one of the Dead Three who will feature prominently in our story. Every murder, every assassination, every life taken in violence feeds power to Baal. During the time of troubles, Baal foresaw his own death and created progeny, the Baal spawn, to ensure his eventual resurrection. If you played the original Baldur's Gate games, you played as one of these Baal spawn. Bane, the Black Lord, god of tyranny and domination. He represents the desire for absolute control, the need to subjugate and rule. His influence drives the absolute, the mysterious force you're investigating throughout much of Baldur's Gate 3. Myrkul, the Lord of Bones, god of death and decay. Unlike Kalimver, the current god of the dead who merely shepherds souls to their afterlife, Myrkul represents death itself, the ending, the rot, the fear of mortality. These three gods, Baal, Bane, and Myrkul, form what we call the Dead Three. They're called this not just because they're death-adjacent deities, but because they all actually died during the time of troubles, an event we'll explore later. Yet death, for gods, is not always permanent. Now let's introduce another crucial element to our story, the Illithids, better known as Mind Flayers. Mind Flayers are not native to Toril. They come from somewhere else, somewhere alien and wrong by our universe's standards. In their distant future, Mind Flayers rule an empire that spans dimensions. They control countless thralls, entire worlds bent to their psychic will, all coordinated through massive psychic entities called Elder Brains. An Elder Brain is exactly what it sounds like, a colossal brain floating in a brine pool, formed from the combined brains of dead Mind Flayers. When an Illithid dies, its brain is absorbed into the Elder Brain, adding its memories, its power, and its consciousness to the collective. These entities are among the most powerful psychic forces in existence. But here's where it gets strange. Mind flayers are time travelers. Not in the sense of individuals moving through time, but their entire species exists in a temporal paradox. They came from the future, conquered the past, and now exist throughout the timeline. This is why their origins are so mysterious. They may not have an origin in the traditional sense. The nautiloid ship that opens Baldur's Gate 3, the Mind Flayer tadpoles, the Elder Brain you'll eventually face, all of these are part of a civilization so alien, so fundamentally different from humanoid life, that their very existence is an affront to the natural order. Mind Flayers reproduce through seromorphosis, the process that every infected individual desperately tries to avoid. A tadpole is inserted into a humanoid's eye and travels to the brain. Over about a week, it consumes the host's brain tissue, replacing it with its own matter, reshaping the skull, destroying everything that made the host who they were. What emerges is a mind flayer wearing the host's body like a suit. This is the fate awaiting the infected unless a cure can be found. Every rest brings the question, will the next awakening be as oneself or as something else entirely? This constant ticking clock drives the urgency of the quest for a cure. Now we travel forward thousands of years to one of the most important civilizations in Faerunian history, Netheril. Netheril wasn't always a magical superpower. It started as a collection of nomadic tribes in the narrow sea region, surviving in a harsh environment. But everything changed when a man named Ialam discovered the Nether Scrolls, ancient artifacts containing magical knowledge from the creator races who came before even the oldest elven civilizations. These scrolls didn't just teach magic, they revealed secrets of reality itself. With this knowledge, the Netherese began to advance at an unprecedented rate. They learned to fly, to extend their lifespans, to reshape matter with thought. Within generations, Netheril transformed from nomadic tribes to a civilization that would make even modern Waterdeep look primitive. The greatest achievement of the Netherese were the floating cities, or enclaves. Imagine entire cities, not just buildings but entire urban landscapes, suspended in the air through pure magical force. Gravity was merely a suggestion to the Netherese. They built their homes in the sky, looking down upon the earth below. But with power came arrogance. The greatest arcanist of Netheril was a man named Karsus. While others were content to master the magic they'd learned, Karsus wanted more. He wanted to become a god. Through years of research, Karsus developed a spell, the most powerful spell ever created by mortal hands. Karsus's avatar, a 12th level spell, in a system where 9th level spells are supposed to be the absolute limit, allowed him to temporarily steal the divine power of a god. He chose Mystyrwyle, the goddess of magic herself, believing that with her power he could save Netheril from the Farim, magical creatures that were attacking the Empire. He cast his spell, and for one brief moment, Karsus succeeded. He became the god of magic. And in that moment, every spell in the world stopped working. You see, Mystyrwyle wasn't just a goddess who happened to oversee magic, she was the weave, actively maintaining it at every moment. When Karsus took her power, he took on the responsibility of maintaining the weave worldwide. But he was mortal. He had mortal limitations, mortal understanding. He couldn't handle the cosmic responsibility he'd seized. The weave began to unravel. Mystyrwyle, in her dying moment, realized what had to be done. She sacrificed herself, severing Karsus's connection to her power and rebooting the weave. She died to save it, and was immediately reborn as Mystra, a new goddess with the same purpose but different rules. New limits would be placed on magic. No mortal would ever cast a spell above 10th level again, and later, 9th level became the new maximum. But the damage was done. Without the magic supporting them, the floating cities of Netheril fell from the sky. Picture it, dozens of cities, each the size of a major metropolis, plummeting to Earth. The impact created craters visible from space. Millions died instantly. The survivors found themselves in a world where their magical infrastructure no longer worked, where their stored food had been an enclave, where everything they'd built had literally crashed and burned. The desert of Anarok exists because of the fall of Netheril. Where once stood lush forests and farmland, now there's only sand and death, a scar on the world that has never healed. So why does this matter for Baldur's Gate 3? Because Netherese artifacts are still out there, buried in ruins, hidden in tombs, waiting to be found by the curious or the foolish. Gale of Waterdeep is a wizard, and like all ambitious wizards, he wanted to push boundaries. He found a Netherese artifact, a book that promised power. And like Karsus before him, he reached for something beyond his grasp. The orb in Gale's chest is Netherese magic, potentially a fragment of the same destructive forces that brought down the floating cities. It feeds on magic, consuming weave energy to sustain itself. Without regular magical items to consume, it will detonate, and when it does, it won't just kill Gale. It will create a blast radius measured in miles, a tear in the weave that could consume entire cities. Mystra gave Gale this orb, in a sense. Or more accurately, she allowed him to be afflicted by it when he transgressed against her. You see, Gale and Mystra were lovers, a mortal wizard and the goddess of magic herself. Their relationship was intimate, romantic, and ultimately doomed by Gale's ambition. When Gale found what he thought was a piece of the weave that Mystra had lost, he tried to return it to her, to prove his love, to show his worthiness. But it wasn't a lost piece of the weave. It was something else, something dangerous and Netherese in nature. The moment he touched it, it bonded to him, began consuming him from the inside. And Mystra abandoned him. This is the wound that drives Gale, not just the physical orb eating his soul, but the emotional abandonment by the goddess he loved. When you talk to him about magic, about ambition, about reaching for the divine, you're seeing someone who's been burned by getting too close to the sun but who still can't help looking up at it with longing. Speaking of Netherese artifacts, let's talk about one of the most important items you'll encounter in Baldur's Gate 3, the Crown of Karsus. This crown was created by Karsus before his catastrophic attempt to become a god. It's an artifact of immense power, designed to augment and control magical forces beyond normal mortal capacity. After the fall of Netheril, it was lost, buried in the ruins of the Empire, presumed destroyed or hidden beyond all finding. But it wasn't destroyed. The Dead Three found it. More specifically, a recently resurrected Merkel knew where it was. The Dead Three stole the crown of Karsus from the depths where it lay hidden and used it to enslave an elder brain. Think about that for a moment. They took an artifact from a fallen empire of magical supremacy and used it to control one of the most powerful psychic entities in existence. This is the foundation of the Absolute, not a new god, but an elder brain being controlled by the Dead Three through the crown of Karsus. The tadpoles in your head, the mysterious psychic force calling to you, the true souls, who seem blessed with power, it all traces back to this unholy marriage of ancient Netherese magic and mind flayer psychic dominance. When the final confrontation with the Absolute comes, one of the crucial choices involves the crown. Should it be destroyed, ending its threat forever? Should it be given to Mystra, returning dangerous power to the goddess of magic? Or should it be kept, with the belief that it can be used responsibly where others failed? There's a beautiful irony in that choice. Karsus reached for godhood with an artifact of his own making and destroyed civilization. Now that same artifact presents itself, and the question becomes whether anyone is wise enough to do what Karsus couldn't. Before we can understand the threats facing Baldur's Gate, we need to understand the city itself. Baldur's Gate is not an ancient city like Waterdeep or Neverwinter. It's relatively young, founded only about 400 years ago by a man named Baldur, an explorer, adventurer, and merchant captain whose statue still stands in the city that bears his name. Baldur discovered the site where the city now stands during his voyages along the Sword Coast. It was perfectly positioned, a natural harbor, access to trade routes both by sea and by land, and relatively defensible against the monsters that roamed the wilderness. He established a trading post there, and within his lifetime, it grew into a proper settlement. But Baldur himself disappeared. He set out on one final voyage and was never seen again. The city mourned its founder and elevated him to the status of a legendary hero. His story became the stuff of myth, the perfect adventurer who built something lasting before sailing off into mystery. The truth, as you'll discover in Baldur's Gate 3, is far stranger and more tragic than anyone in the city imagines. But we'll return to that later. After Baldur's disappearance, the city continued to grow. Its strategic location made it a crucial trading hub. Merchants from across Faerun came to Baldur's Gate to buy and sell goods. The city became wealthy, powerful, and increasingly important in regional politics. But wealth attracts danger. Pirates raided its ships. Monsters from the wilderness attacked travelers on the roads. Rival cities viewed it with jealous eyes. Baldur's Gate needed protection, and that protection came in the form of two organizations, the Flaming Fist and the Council of Four. The government of Baldur's Gate is complicated. Officially, it's ruled by the Council of Four, though sometimes there are more than 4 members. It's a title, not an accurate count. These are the city's most powerful dukes and patriarchs, the noble families who've accumulated wealth and influence over generations. The council makes laws, negotiates treaties, and supposedly guides the city's destiny. But in practice, much of the real power in Baldur's Gate lies elsewhere, with the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company. The Flaming Fist started as a mercenary company founded by a man named Elton. They were hired to provide security for the city's trade routes and gradually became the de facto police force for Baldur's Gate itself. They're not technically a city guard, they're a private military company. But they have the contract to enforce laws within the city, which gives them tremendous power. This creates an interesting dynamic. The council makes the laws, but the Flaming Fist enforces them. And since the Flaming Fist is a mercenary company, their loyalty is fluid. They'll serve whoever pays them, whoever can offer them the best deal. By the time of Baldur's Gate 3, the Flaming Fist has been infiltrated by true souls, people infected with modified mind flayer tadpoles and under the control of the Absolute. The very organization meant to protect the city has become an instrument of its potential subjugation. Baldur's Gate is a city of layers, both literal and metaphorical. The lower city is where most people live and work. It's crowded, noisy, diverse, and alive with energy. Here you'll find the markets, the docks, the artisan workshops, the taverns where adventurers gather. It's not exactly dangerous, but it's rough around the edges. The Flaming Fist patrols the streets, but they can't be everywhere at once. The upper city is where the wealthy live. The patriarchs have their estates here, behind walls and gates, with private guards to keep out the riffraff. It's cleaner, quieter, and infinitely more exclusive. There's a saying in Baldur's Gate: lower city folks work, upper city folks live. The resentment between the classes is palpable. Then there's the underbelly, not an official district, but a network of tunnels, sewers, and hidden spaces beneath the city. Here dwell those who can't or won't live in the light of day, criminals, refugees, monsters, and those simply forgotten by society above. In Baldur's Gate 3, you'll explore all 3 layers. You'll walk the streets of the lower city, trying to uncover the conspiracy threatening the entire region. You'll navigate the politics of the upper city, dealing with noble families and their agendas. And you'll descend into the underbelly to face threats that lurk in darkness. When Baldur's Gate appears in the story, the city is dealing with a massive refugee crisis. People from Elturel and the surrounding countryside have flooded into the city, fleeing the devastation caused by the descent into Avernus, an event that saw the entire city of Elturel dragged into the 9 hells. The city isn't equipped to handle this influx. Resources are strained. Tensions are high. The refugees are crammed into makeshift camps, and the citizens of Baldur's Gate resent the burden on their city's resources. This crisis is being exploited by the Absolute's cult. Desperate people make excellent recruits. When people have nothing, when they're hungry and afraid and no one seems to care, the promise of purpose and power is seductive. The cult offers what the city doesn't: a sense of belonging, of meaning, of strength. Refugees who've been converted into true souls appear throughout the city. Others are on the brink, considering accepting a tadpole just to end their suffering. Impossible choices emerge. How do people help those in need while also protecting the city from infiltration? How does compassion balance with security? These aren't just background details. They're moral questions woven throughout the narrative. Let's talk about how dead gods can still cause problems for the living. During an event called the Time of Troubles, about 135 years before Baldur's Gate 3, the gods were cast down from their divine realms and forced to walk Toril as mortals, more or less. This was a punishment from Aol, the overgod, for their negligence and pride. Many gods died during this time, their mortal forms slain and their divine essence scattered. Bal, Bane, and Merkel all died during the Time of Troubles. True, permanent divine death, or so everyone thought. But gods, especially gods of murder, tyranny, and death, are not so easily erased. Each of them had contingency plans. Bal created the Balspawn, mortal children carrying his divine essence. When enough of them died, their collected divine power would resurrect him. This was the entire plot of the original Baldur's Gate series, and by the time of Baldur's Gate 3, Bal has indeed returned, though not at full strength. Bane was resurrected by his followers through a complex ritual. His faith never died, and where there is faith, a god can return. Merkel's essence was preserved in the crown of Karsus itself, the very artifact the Dead Three would later use to enslave an elder brain. By the time of Baldur's Gate 3, all three are back, though still weakened from their deaths. They're no longer the cosmic powers they once were. There's something between god and mortal, powerful but not omnipotent, ambitious but constrained. And they want their full power back. The Dead Three's plan is audacious, manipulative, and terrifying in its scope. Step 1. Find the Crown of Karsus. This ancient Netherese artifact has the power to control and amplify magical forces. Merkel knew where it was hidden, in the depths of the Sea of Swords, protected by powerful wards and guardians. Step 2. Use the crown to enslave an elder brain. Mind flayers are among the most powerful psychic forces in existence. But an elder brain is something else entirely. It's a collective consciousness formed from countless mind flayer minds, a being of staggering psychic power. Normally, such a creature is beyond the control of any god. But with the crown of Karsus amplifying their power, the Dead Three could bind it to their will. Step 3. Modify the seromorphosis process. Normal mind flayer tadpoles consume the host's brain and create a new illithid. But what if you could modify the process? What if the tadpole could grant psychic powers without completely destroying the host? What if you could create an army of powerful individuals who think they're gaining power, when really they're being enslaved? This is the genius and horror of the absolute. The tadpoles aren't bugs, they're features. People willingly accept them, believing they're joining a powerful new faith, gaining abilities beyond mortal ken. And technically that's true. True souls do gain powers. They can communicate telepathically, influence minds, resist certain magic. But they're also connected to the elder brain. They're part of a vast psychic network that the Dead Three control through the Crown of Karsus. Every true soul thinks they're an individual blessed with power. In reality, they're cells in a vast organism, being coordinated without their knowledge. Step 4. Convert enough people to create an army. Once you have thousands of true souls, all psychically connected and under your control, you can take over regions, cities, maybe even nations. And with each conquest, you create more true souls, expanding your power exponentially. Step 5. Ascend to true godhood. With enough worshippers, with enough fear and death and tyranny in your name, the Dead Three could reclaim their former glory and perhaps exceed it. They could become gods not just in name but in ultimate power. It's a perfect plan. except for one thing, you. To execute their plan, each of the dead three selected a chosen, a mortal champion to act as their primary agent in the world. Ender Gortash is Bane's chosen. He's a brilliant artificer, a master manipulator, and one of the co-architects of the absolute plot. Before the events of the game, Gortash was a nobody, a street kid sold into slavery by his own parents. But he escaped, learned, grew powerful, and eventually caught Bane's attention. Gortash represents tyranny in its most insidious form, not brute force, but control through systems, through technology, through making people dependent on you for their security and prosperity. When you meet Gortash in Baldur's Gate 3, he's already positioned himself as one of the city's leaders. He's charismatic, reasonable, and utterly convinced that authoritarian control is the only way to maintain order in a chaotic world. He offers you a partnership. After all, you're both trying to control the Elder Brain, just for different reasons. He's the kind of villain who makes you think, is he entirely wrong? Orin the Red is Baal's chosen, though she wasn't always. Before Orin, the position belonged to someone else, someone you might know very well, depending on your choices. Orin is a shapeshifter, an artist of murder, a being for whom killing isn't just a task but an art form to be perfected. She's been raised in Baal's cult from birth, shaped into the perfect instrument of murder. Orin is unstable, driven by a need to prove herself worthy to her god. She sees murder as sacred, violence as prayer. And she's jealous, murderously jealous, of anyone who might rival her position as Baal's favorite. This jealousy becomes crucial to your story, especially if you're playing as a Dark Urge character. Catherick Thorm is Merkel's chosen, and his story is perhaps the most tragic of the three. Catherick wasn't always a servant of death. Once, he was a devout follower of Selûne, living in the town of Rythwin with his family. He had a daughter, Isabel, whom he loved more than anything in the world. Then Isabel died. Grief broke Catherick. He turned from Selûne to Shar, believing the Lady of Loss could help him cope with his pain. But that wasn't enough. When Shar couldn't bring his daughter back, he turned to darker powers still. He found Merkel and made a deal, become the chosen of death, and gain the power to resurrect Isabel. Merkel agreed, but godly gifts always come with a price. Isabel was brought back, but she wasn't quite right. The resurrection bound her soul in ways that made her dependent on her father's continued existence. And Catherick himself was transformed into something no longer quite mortal, cursed with undeath, unable to die as long as certain conditions were met. The shadow curse blighting the land around Moonrise Towers? That's a consequence of Catherick's choices, his deals with dark powers. An entire region has been plunged into deathly darkness because one man couldn't accept loss. The public face of the Dead Three's plan is the cult of the Absolute, a new religious movement spreading throughout the Sword Coast. The cult preaches that the Absolute is a new god, more powerful than the old gods, offering genuine power to its followers rather than empty promises. And they have proof. True souls genuinely do gain abilities. They can dominate minds, communicate telepathically, resist certain magical effects. For common people who've never had access to such power, this is intoxicating. The cult is organized into a clear hierarchy. At the top are the chosen of the Dead Three, though their true nature is hidden. Below them are high-ranking true souls who lead major cult operations. Below them are regular true souls, the bulk of the cult's membership. And at the bottom are aspirants and converts who haven't yet been infected but are being groomed for ceremorphosis. The cult doesn't just rely on religious fervor. They're pragmatic. They infiltrate existing power structures, the Flaming Fist, the nobility of Baldur's Gate, even the refugee camps. They offer solutions to real problems: security, food, purpose. They're not just fanatics. They're organized, well-funded, and terrifyingly effective. When you first encounter the cult in Act 1, they seem like a standard evil organization. But as you dig deeper, you realize the scope of the threat. This isn't a few bandits with religious delusions. This is a conspiracy that could topple nations. Let's meet the people who join this journey, starting with someone likely encountered first, Shadowheart. She's found on the Nautiloid, trapped in a pod, desperate for rescue. She's a half-elf cleric, devoted to Shar, the goddess of darkness and loss. She's carrying something important, a mysterious artifact that protects the infected from the Mind Flayer tadpole's transformation. And she's terrified someone will take it from her. But Shadowheart isn't just suspicious because she's a cleric of an evil goddess. She's suspicious because she can't afford not to be. Her entire life has been spent in service to Shar's church, trained as an infiltrator and shadow agent. She's been taught that weakness is failure, that mercy is foolishness, that darkness must consume light. Except she has a secret. She doesn't remember most of her life. Shar's church uses memory modification as a tool of control. When memories become painful, when doubt creeps in, when disciples might question their path, the church removes those memories, replacing them with gaps and shadows. Shadowheart has been subjected to this treatment multiple times. Her past is a mystery even to herself. As time passes with her, inconsistencies appear. She claims absolute devotion to Shar, but she shows compassion when she thinks no one's watching. She says she was raised in Baldur's Gate, but has no specific memories of the city. She insists that she chose this path willingly, but can't explain when or why she made that choice. The truth, uncovered if her trust is earned, is heartbreaking. Shadowheart was born Genevieve Halaleaf, the daughter of Selionite worshippers, followers of Shar's hated sister, the Moon Goddess. When she was young, Sharan agents raided her home and kidnapped her. They took her to the House of Grief in Baldur's Gate, where they systematically erased her memories and indoctrinated her into Shar's worship. Everything she believes about herself is a lie implanted by her captors. Her choice to serve Shar was made by a terrified child who didn't understand what was happening. Her devotion is the result of decades of psychological manipulation and magical memory alteration. And her parents? They're still alive, imprisoned in the same house of grief, held as leverage to ensure their daughter's obedience. They've spent decades in torture and isolation, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, their daughter might remember who she really is. Shadowheart's personal quest in Baldur's Gate 3 is about reclaiming identity. She's been given a mission by Shar's church to infiltrate a Selionite temple and steal a powerful artifact, the Night Song. She's been told this will make her a Dark Justiciar, a high rank in Shar's clergy, a position of power and prestige. But when she finally reaches the Night Song, she discovers it's not an object, it's a person. Eileen, an Aasimar paladin, daughter of Selûne herself, has been imprisoned for over a century, kept alive but unable to die, tortured and exploited by Catherick Thorm. Shadowheart is ordered to kill Eileen. This is her test, her moment of ascension. Kill the daughter of the goddess her church hates, prove her absolute loyalty to Shar, become a Dark Justiciar. But she can choose differently. If trust has been built with Shadowheart, if she's been encouraged to question the contradictions in her faith, if she's been helped to see that loss and darkness aren't the only path, she can refuse. She can choose mercy over murder, light over darkness. She can reject Shar. This choice has consequences. Shar, enraged by her disciples' betrayal, curses Shadowheart. A wound appears on her hand, causing perpetual pain, a reminder of what she's turned away from. But she's free. Her memories begin to return, including memories of her parents. And if she's helped to rescue them from the House of Grief, she can reclaim not just her name but her true family. Shadowheart's story is fundamentally about agency, about realizing that what you thought were your choices might have been someone else's programming, and finding the courage to make real choices even when they're painful. Lae'zel is not here to make friends. She's a Githyanki warrior, trained from birth to be a weapon, and she has no patience for weakness, sentiment, or what she calls Istik, lesser beings, which is to say, everyone who isn't Githyanki. The Githyanki are a fascinating culture. They were once enslaved by mind flayers, bred as psychic warrior slaves to serve the Illithid Empire. But they rebelled, led by a legendary figure named Gith. They broke free and swore eternal war against the Illithids, becoming one of the few species that mind flayers genuinely fear. After their freedom, the Githyanki split into two groups. The Githzerai pursued a path of monastic discipline and philosophical order. The Githyanki proper became militant raiders, living in the astral plane and occasionally descending to the material plane to hunt mind flayers and take what they want from lesser species. The Githyanki are ruled by their eternal queen, Vlaakith. She's a lich, an undead sorcerer of immense power, who has ruled for centuries. The Githyanki worship her as a god queen, and her word is absolute law. Lae'zel believes all of this completely. She believes Githyanki are superior. She believes Vlaakith is divine. She believes the only proper response to the tadpole in her head is to return to her people, undergo a purification ritual, and then continue her war against the Gaik, mind flayers. She's wrong about all of it. As the journey continues with Lae'zel, cracks appear in her worldview. She meets other Githyanki who have rebelled against Vlaakith. She learns that the purification ritual she's counting on doesn't remove tadpoles. It kills the infected. Vlaakith would rather see her own people dead than risk them being turned into mind flayers. Worse, Lae'zel discovers that Vlaakith is a tyrant who's been consuming the souls of her greatest warriors to extend her own power. When Githyanki reach a certain level of power, they're summoned to an audience with their queen. They think this is an honor. It's actually an execution. Vlaakith drains their essence, ensuring no one ever grows powerful enough to challenge her rule. This revelation is devastating for Lae'zel. Her entire identity is built on her devotion to her queen and her people. Learning that Vlaakith is not a benevolent god-queen but a paranoid tyrant who murders her own subjects threatens to shatter everything Lae'zel believes. She can find a new path. There's a Githyanki resistance movement, led by Orpheus, the legendary prince of the Githyanki, son of the original Mother Gith who led the rebellion against the mind flayers. Orpheus has been imprisoned in the astral plane for millennia. His psychic power used to protect the Githyanki from mind flayer domination, but the truth of his imprisonment has been hidden. Lae'zel can choose to join this resistance, to fight for a Githyanki people free from Vlaakith's tyranny. She can maintain her pride in her culture while rejecting the corrupt leader who's betrayed it. Or if trust hasn't been built, if her worldview hasn't been challenged effectively, Lae'zel might remain loyal to Vlaakith. She might reject the truth even when it's undeniable, because acknowledging it would mean accepting that everything she's dedicated her life to is a lie. Lae'zel's story is about fanaticism and deprogramming, about what happens when your entire worldview is built on propaganda, and how painful but necessary it is to see the truth. We've already talked about Gale a bit, but let's dig deeper into his story because it touches on themes central to the entire game: ambition, hubris, and the price of reaching for the divine. Gale of Waterdeep is a wizard prodigy. From a young age, he showed exceptional talent with the weave. He mastered spells that took others years to learn. He earned the attention of the finest magical academy in Faerun. And most importantly, he earned the attention of Mystra herself. The goddess of magic took Gale as a lover. Think about that for a moment. Not just a worshipper, not just a devoted follower, an actual romantic partner. He walked in her divine realm. He learned secrets of magic that other wizards only dream about. He was chosen by divinity itself. And it still wasn't enough for him. Gale's flaw is that he always wants to prove himself. To show that he's worthy. To climb higher, reach further, achieve more. When he learned that there was something Mystra had lost, a piece of her divine essence, or so he thought, he saw an opportunity. He could recover it. He could return it to her. He could prove that his love was more than mortal desire. It was devotion worthy of a god. He found what he was looking for in a forbidden tome. He reached out to claim it. And the moment he touched it, he realized his mistake. It wasn't Mystra's lost essence. It was something else. A fragment of the magic that destroyed Netheril, a piece of the catastrophe that Karsus created when he tried to become a god. It was a wound in the weave, stabilized and weaponized, an orb of pure destructive potential. And now it was inside him, fused to his chest, consuming his life force. Gale tried to explain to Mistra what had happened. He begged for her help. But she saw only that he'd transgressed against her directly, that he'd touched dangerous magic she'd forbidden mortals to access. She severed their connection and cast him out. So Gale returned to Waterdeep, to his tower, and waited to die. He cut himself off from friends and colleagues. He stayed inside, consuming magical artifacts to feed the orb, prolonging the inevitable. He was rotting from the inside out, isolated and abandoned by the goddess he loved. Until the Mind Flayers abducted him. The tadpole, ironically, stabilized the orb. The two magical afflictions somehow neutralized each other's worst effects. For the first time in a year, Gale could leave his tower, could adventure, could live, even if that life came with its own countdown timer. Gale's quest throughout the story of Baldur's Gate 3 revolves around finding a cure for the orb, or finding a way to use it. Mistra eventually contacts him with an offer: detonate the orb in the presence of the Absolute's Elder Brain, destroying both the orb and the threat in one sacrificial act. In exchange, she'll restore him in the afterlife, make him her chosen in death if he couldn't be in life. It's a tempting offer. Gale could go out as a hero, save the world, and finally earn Mistra's forgiveness. All it costs is his life. But he can refuse. He can be helped to see that his worth isn't determined by Mistra's approval, that his life has value beyond what he can sacrifice. He can find another way to deal with the orb, to stabilize it, extract it, or even to use it without dying. And if he does, Gale can reclaim his power on his own terms. Not as Mistra's penitent or her suicide bomber, but as a wizard who made mistakes, learned from them, and chose to keep living despite the cost. There's even a darker path for Gale. If encouraged in his ambition, if pushed toward godhood rather than away from it, Gale can claim the crown of Karsus for himself. He can use the same artifact that enslaved an elder brain to ascend to divinity. He can become a god of ambition, of magic wielded for personal power. This is the path Karsus walked, and it destroyed civilization. But Gale believes he's different, believes he's learned from Karsus's mistakes. And maybe he has. Or maybe he's just repeating them with better justification. Gale's story is about recognizing that proving yourself to others is a game you can never win. Someone will always move the goalposts. Real growth means learning to value yourself without external validation. Astarion is a vampire spawn, not a true vampire, but someone turned into a vampire's servant. He's bound to obey his master, Khazad-dûr Zar, a vampire lord in Baldur's Gate. For 200 years, Astarion has been a slave, forced to lure victims back to Khazad-dûr's palace, witnessing and participating in horrors he couldn't prevent. When you meet him, he's newly free. The Mind Flayer's abduction severed his connection to Khazad-dûr. Tadpole's psychic interference broke the vampiric bond. For the first time in 2 centuries, Astarion can walk in daylight without burning. The tadpole provides protection. For the first time, he can disobey without being physically compelled to obey. He's intoxicated by this freedom, but he's also terrified. Because he knows Khazad-dûr will be looking for him, and when Khazad-dûr finds him, the punishment will be worse than death. Astarion hides his fear behind a veneer of shallow charm and cruel humor. He pretends to be a hedonist who only cares about pleasure and power. He makes jokes about murder. He advocates for the most self-serving choices. He's performing the role of someone who doesn't care because caring, for 2 centuries, only brought pain. But careful observation reveals the cracks. He's traumatized in ways he doesn't fully acknowledge. He dissociates when confronted with his past. He's hypersexual as a defense mechanism. He's spent centuries using seduction as a survival tool, and he doesn't know how to connect with people any other way. Astarion's backstory can be pieced together through conversations and investigation. Before he was turned, he was a magistrate in Baldur's Gate, a corrupt one by his own admission, but still a person with a life, with choices. One night, he made a ruling that angered the wrong people. They beat him nearly to death in an alley and left him to die. Cazador found him bleeding out and offered immortality. Astarion, desperate to live, accepted. Only after the transformation did he understand what he'd agreed to. Cazador didn't want a partner or even a servant, he wanted a slave. And vampiric compulsion made refusal impossible. For 200 years, Astarion has been forced to lure people to their deaths. Beautiful people, lonely people, desperate people, anyone Cazador desired. Astarion would seduce them, bring them back to the palace, and watch as they were tortured and killed. Sometimes he was forced to participate in the torture. Sometimes he was tortured himself as punishment, or simply for Cazador's entertainment. He was also one of 7 vampire spawn Cazador kept as slaves. The others are his siblings, though not by blood, spawn created around the same time, suffering together but also competing for scraps of favor from their master. When you reach Baldur's Gate, Astarion learns that Cazador is conducting a ritual, a massive vampiric ascension ritual that requires the sacrifice of 7 spawn along with thousands of other souls. Cazador intends to become a true vampire ascendant, gaining powers beyond normal vampirism, the ability to walk in daylight, immunity to typical vampiric weaknesses, and the power to create spawn who aren't bound to him. The ritual has been Cazador's goal for centuries. Astarion and his siblings were always meant to be sacrifices, their blood and soul's fuel for their master's ascension. But here's the twist: the ritual doesn't require Cazador to be the ascendant. Any vampire spawn in the circle can seize the power if they act at the right moment. Astarion realizes he could take Cazador's place. He could sacrifice his siblings and the thousands of trapped souls to become the vampire ascendant himself. This is Astarion's moment of truth. Does he break the cycle of abuse, or does he perpetuate it? Does he become the monster his master was, or does he choose a different path? If his darker impulses are encouraged, if he's told that power is the only thing that matters, Astarion will perform the ritual. He'll kill his siblings, consume thousands of souls, and become the vampire ascendant. He'll gain immense power. He'll no longer fear sunlight or his former master. But he'll also lose something crucial. Ascended Astarion is cruel in ways mortal Astarion never was. The ritual burns away what remains of his humanity. He becomes manipulative, possessive, and genuinely dangerous, especially to those close to him. Alternatively, he can be convinced to reject the ritual. To kill Cazador but not take his place. To remain a spawn but free, rather than become a vampire lord in chains of his own making. This path is harder. Astarion will still be vulnerable to sunlight once the tadpole is removed. He'll still have limitations. But he'll remain himself. He'll have chosen freedom over power, chosen to break the cycle rather than continue it. Astarion's story is about recognizing that becoming your abuser doesn't constitute freedom. Real freedom means choosing not to perpetuate the harm done to you, even when you have the power to do so. Wyll Ravengard is known as the Blade of Frontiers, a heroic monster hunter who's saved countless lives along the Sword Coast. He's charming, confident, and seems to have walked straight out of a storybook. He's the hero every tavern sings about. He's also bound by a pact to a devil. 17 years ago, when Wyll was just 17 years old, his home city of Baldur's Gate was under attack. The dragon cult had infiltrated the city, and an army of dragons was about to destroy everything Wyll held dear. His father, Ulder Ravengard, Grand Duke and leader of the Flaming Fist, was fighting desperately, but it wasn't enough. A Cambion named Mizora appeared to young Wyll with an offer: sell your soul, become my warlock, and gain the power to save your city. Wyll accepted. How could he not? The alternative was watching everyone he loved burn. With Mizora's power, Wyll drove back the dragon cult and saved Baldur's Gate. He became a hero. But his father, learning his son had made a pact with the devil, banished him. Baldur couldn't have a son bound to the hells, couldn't show that kind of weakness, couldn't accept that his boy had sold his soul even for the best of reasons. So Wyll left. He became a wandering hero, using his warlock powers to help people across the Sword Coast. He built a legend as the Blade of Frontiers. He saved villages from monsters, rescued people from bandits, fought evil wherever he found it. He became the hero his father didn't believe he could be. But Mizora owns him. The pact isn't metaphorical, it's a literal contract binding his soul. Mizora can command him, can punish him if he disobeys, and when he dies, his soul goes to the hells to serve her masters for eternity. Throughout Baldur's Gate 3's story, Mizora appears periodically with tasks for Wyll. She's manipulative, cruel, and takes pleasure in reminding him of his chains. She's particularly interested in the events around Baldur's Gate, and has her own agenda regarding the Absolute Crisis. Wyll's personal quest revolves around his father and his pact. Grand Duke Ulder Ravengard has been captured and is being held by the cult of the Absolute. Wyll desperately wants to rescue him, to prove to his father that he's still worthy of his name despite the pact. But Mizora doesn't want Ulder rescued. She has plans that require him to remain a prisoner, or better yet, to die. She commands Wyll to abandon the rescue attempt, to let his father suffer and potentially die. This is Wyll's impossible choice: obey Mizora and abandon his father, or break the pact and damn his soul immediately, along with suffering whatever torments Mizora can inflict. Wyll can find a middle path through clever maneuvering and some dangerous negotiations. It's possible to rescue Ulder without technically breaking the pact. It's also possible to help Wyll break free of Mizora entirely, though the cost is high. His warlock powers diminish, his father may never forgive him, and he still has to live with the knowledge that he sold his soul, even if he's no longer paying the price. Wyll's story is about the hero's burden, the cost of doing the right thing, and whether there's redemption available for those who've made terrible choices for good reasons. Karlach is the heart of your party in more ways than one. She's a tiefling barbarian with an infernal engine for a heart, a mechanical device that was literally installed in her chest, replacing her original heart and filling her with hellish fire that makes her an incredible warrior but also slowly killing her. 10 years ago, Karlach was a bodyguard in Baldur's Gate. She was good at her job, loyal, and surprisingly gentle despite her strength. Then her employer, a man named Gortash, who you'll later meet as Bane's chosen, sold her to the archdevil Zariel. Zariel rules Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells, and is constantly fighting the Blood War, an eternal conflict between devils and demons. She needed soldiers, and Karlach was strong. So Zariel ripped out Karlach's heart and replaced it with an infernal engine, transforming her into a living weapon. For a decade Karlach fought in the Blood War. She killed demons by the thousands. She had no choice. The engine in her chest bound her to Zariel's service, and disobedience meant agony or death. She watched friends die, became something more monster than person, and lost hope of ever seeing her home again. Then the Mind Flayers abducted her, and suddenly she was free. The Nautiloid crash-landed on the Sword Coast, not far from Baldur's Gate. Karlach was home. She could breathe fresh air, see a real sky, walk on grass instead of hellish battlefield slag. But the engine is killing her. It burns too hot for the material plane. Without the heat of Avernus to balance it, the engine is overloading. She can't touch people without burning them. She can't lower her temperature. And she's burning through her own life force faster every day. When you meet Karlach, she's running from Zariel's bounty hunters, devils sent to drag her back to the hells. She's desperate, angry, and trying to live what might be her last days of freedom to the fullest. Karlach's quest is about finding a way to fix or stabilize her engine. There are a few potential solutions, infernal mechanics who might be able to repair it, magic that could cool it, or even returning to Avernus where the heat balance would keep her alive. But every solution comes with a cost. The mechanics need rare materials. The magic might kill her in the attempt. And returning to Avernus means giving up her freedom, going back to the place that tortured her for a decade. If a solution can't be found, Karlach faces a grim choice as the story nears its end. The engine is critical. She's dying. She can either return to Avernus, where the heat will stabilize her but she'll be trapped in the hells again, or stay on the material plane and burn out, dying free but dying nonetheless. With help, it is possible to find ways to stabilize her long enough to buy more time, but there's no perfect solution. Karlach's story doesn't have a completely happy ending available. Sometimes, the damage done to people can't be fully undone, and they have to live with scars, or make peace with the time they have left. Karlach's story is about injustice and resilience, about being used as a weapon and reclaiming your personhood, and about finding joy even in desperate circumstances. There's one more companion to discuss, though this one is optional and changes the entire nature of the story: the Dark Urge. The Dark Urge is an origin option that can be chosen instead of creating a custom character. Selecting this origin means playing as a specific character with a specific backstory, though none of it will be remembered at first. The Dark Urge wakes up on the Nautiloid with complete amnesia. No knowledge of name, history, or why they're there. But one thing is immediately clear: they have urges. Terrible, violent urges. An overwhelming desire to hurt people, to kill, to revel in blood and suffering. These aren't just idle thoughts. They're compulsions so strong they're almost impossible to resist. A peaceful conversation can suddenly be interrupted by an overwhelming urge to tear out someone's throat with teeth. Trying to help someone might trigger an irresistible desire to betray them in the cruelest way possible. As the story progresses, the truth emerges: the Dark Urge is a ballspawn. Not just any ballspawn, essentially Baal's chosen child, created to be the perfect avatar of murder. They were the original chosen of Baal before Orin. Before the amnesia, the Dark Urge was one of the architects of the absolute plot. They worked with Gortash and Catheric to steal the crown of Karsus and enslave the Elder Brain. They planned the Tadpole conspiracy. This was all their idea, at least in part. But then Orin betrayed them. She's their sister, or half-sister, both of them children of Baal in different ways, and she was jealous of their position as Baal's favorite. She attacked, scrambled their brain literally, and left them for dead. The Mind Flayers found the body and put a tadpole in the ruined head, which actually saved their life by repairing some of the damage. Now they're back, but without memories. And Baal wants his chosen child returned. The Dark Urge whispers constantly, encouraging violence, promising power and pleasure if they'll just give in to what they really are. Playing as the Dark Urge adds an entire new dimension to Baldur's Gate 3. The struggle isn't just against external threats but against oneself. Every act of kindness is a struggle against nature. Every friend made is someone who might be hurt if control is lost. The story gives choices. The Dark Urge can be embraced, becoming the avatar of murder Baal designed. Innocents can be slaughtered, companions betrayed, violence and cruelty reveled in. This path leads to incredible power but also complete loss of agency. Eventually, Baal will control them completely. Or resistance is possible. This is harder. Skill checks must be passed to avoid killing people. Debuffs are suffered when the urge is rejected. And eventually, Baal himself must be faced and the divine heritage rejected directly. If resistance succeeds, freedom can be won. Baal can be rejected and a new identity forged. But it costs the dark powers, the sense of certainty about purpose, the identity that was built by others. A new self must be built from scratch. The Dark Urge playthrough is Baldur's Gate 3 at its most psychologically intense. It's about nature versus nurture, about whether we're defined by where we come from or by what we choose, and about the hard work of becoming good when everything in you screams for cruelty. The story begins in chaos. A mind flayer nautiloid ship tears through dimensions, its hull breached by Githyanki dragon riders. Inside, prisoners who've just had tadpoles inserted into their eyes fight desperately for survival. Among them are Shadowheart, clutching her mysterious artifact, and Lazel, a Githyanki warrior who finds herself on the wrong side of her own people's attack. The ship crashes in the wilderness near Baldur's Gate, scattering survivors across the countryside. Those who survive the crash face an immediate crisis beyond their injuries. The tadpole in their heads is a death sentence, slowly transforming them into mind flayers through the process of seramorphosis. Days remain, perhaps a week at most, before the transformation becomes irreversible. The search for a cure begins immediately. But the wilderness around the crash site reveals something disturbing. The survivors aren't the only ones infected with mind flayer tadpoles. The cult of the Absolute has been spreading these parasites deliberately, offering them as gifts to converts. People are accepting these tadpoles willingly, believing they're receiving divine blessings from a powerful new god. The tadpoles create a strange psychic connection between those infected. True souls, as the cult members call themselves, can sense each other, communicate telepathically, and recognize the parasite's presence in others. This connection leads the survivors to encounter others desperately seeking a cure, forming an unlikely group bound by their shared affliction. The search for answers leads to the Emerald Grove, a sacred druid refuge that's become an uneasy shelter for tiefling refugees fleeing the cult's advance. The grove's leader, a powerful archdruid named Halsin, has gone missing. In his absence, a xenophobic faction among the druids wants to seal the grove and abandon the refugees to whatever fate awaits them outside. The situation is tense. The refugees are desperate, the druids are divided, and goblin raiders allied with the Absolute are preparing an assault. The conflict here reveals something important about the cult's operations. They're not just converting random individuals. They're targeting the vulnerable, the desperate, those with nowhere else to turn. Refugees make perfect recruits when the alternative is starvation or death. Investigation reveals that the goblin forces are being led by 3 powerful true souls, individuals who've been blessed with greater power by the Absolute. These leaders coordinate the cult's operations in the region. Their defeat severely weakens the Absolute's grip on this area, but it also reveals something more important. Each of the leaders carries a piece of a mysterious artifact. When assembled, these pieces form a device that points toward a specific location to the west. Moonrise Towers, a fortress deep in cursed lands. The path forward is clear but treacherous. Moonrise Towers holds answers about the Absolute, about the Mind Flayer connection, about everything. But the entire region surrounding the towers has been consumed by a supernatural shadow curse. This isn't ordinary darkness. It's a manifestation of death itself, creeping across the land. Anything that enters the shadows without protection withers and dies, twisted into undead horrors that shamble through the perpetual gloom. The history of this curse is tied directly to Catheric Thorm, one of the Absolute's leaders. His grief and his dark bargains with powers beyond mortal understanding created this blight. Understanding his story becomes essential to surviving the journey ahead. The shadow-cursed lands present a dramatic shift in atmosphere. Where the wilderness was bright with clear dangers and opportunities for heroism, the cursed region is oppressive, dark, and morally murky. The shadow curse isn't merely an environmental hazard. It's a physical manifestation of death's grip on the land. Where the shadow fell, Shar's domain of loss and darkness has bled into the material plane. The only safe haven in this blighted landscape is Last Light Inn, protected by a magical radiance created by Isabel Thorm. She's Catheric's resurrected daughter, and her divine power, granted through her devotion to Silun, is the sole thing keeping the shadow curse at bay in this small refuge. The inn houses resistance fighters, harpers and other heroes who've been fighting a losing battle against Catheric and his seemingly invincible army. Catheric Thorm's immortality has become legendary among the resistance. He's been killed multiple times, only to rise again. His forces are filled with undead, with true souls, with creatures that don't fear death because their master has conquered it. The Harper leader at last light is Jahira, a legendary hero from previous adventures who's older now, more cautious, but still fighting for what's right. Understanding three crucial elements becomes necessary to progress. First, how does Catherick maintain his immortality? Second, where does the Absolute's power truly originate? Third, how can anyone hope to reach Moonrise Towers safely through this cursed land? The answers lie in dark places. Beneath a ruined mausoleum, Catherick's family crypt reveals the source of his undying nature. His pact with Merkel grants him power, yes, but the mechanics of his immortality are even more sinister. His daughter Isabel's soul has been tethered to an artifact hidden in the Shadowfell itself. As long as that artifact remains intact and Isabel's soul remains bound to it, Catherick cannot permanently die. The Absolute's power source becomes clear when Moonrise Towers finally comes within reach. Whether through infiltration, diplomacy, or direct assault, reaching the towers reveals what lies beneath them. A Mind Flayer colony has been constructed in the depths, a grotesque place of brine pools and brain-shaped architecture where horrific experiments continue. In the deepest chamber of this colony, the truth about the Absolute finally reveals itself. An elder brain floats in its brine pool, the massive psychic entity that should be coordinating the Mind Flayer colony. But this elder brain has been enslaved, wrapped in chains of Netherese magic, crowned with the crown of Karsus itself. Three figures stand before it in that moment of revelation: Catherick Thorm, Enver Gortash appearing for the first time, and Orin the Red with her shifting, unstable presence. The Dead Three's chosen, all together, their plan laid bare. They're using the crown to control the elder brain, creating a vast psychic network of true souls that spans the entire region and beyond. They're building an army to conquer not just Baldur's Gate but the entire Sword Coast. Every person infected with a modified tadpole becomes another node in this network, another soldier in their army, another worshipper feeding power to their dark gods. The confrontation with Catherick comes to its inevitable conclusion in these depths. With the help of Dame Eileen, if she's been freed from her century-long imprisonment, the battle against Catherick can finally end permanently. His connection to Merkel is severed. His immortality fails. The man who couldn't accept his daughter's death finally faces his own. But his defeat solves nothing. The elder brain remains enslaved. Gortash and Orin remain free to continue their plans. The Absolute remains a threat to everything. As this phase of the journey concludes, something changes with the tadpoles. The Emperor, a mysterious voice that has been occasionally offering guidance, finally reveals its true nature. It's a Mind Flayer, one that claims to have been protecting its hosts from the Elder Brain's control. It insists it's different from other Illithids, that it's been shielding everyone from total domination, that cooperation is the only path forward. The question of whether to trust this creature becomes one of the most difficult decisions in the entire story. Can a Mind Flayer truly be trusted? Does it have its own agenda? Or is it genuinely trying to help stop the Absolute? The city of Baldur's Gate finally comes into view, massive and sprawling along the coast. But this isn't the peaceful merchant city it should be. The refugee crisis has reached critical mass. The Flaming Fist has been heavily infiltrated by true souls. Political tensions are at a breaking point, and somewhere in the city's depths, the Absolute's final plans are reaching their conclusion. Multiple threads converge in Baldur's Gate. The Absolute must be stopped before its plan reaches completion. The Dead Three intend to use the Elder Brain to convert the city's entire population into true souls or sacrifice them to fuel their ascension to full godhood. Meanwhile, the personal stories of those who've been fighting the Absolute reach their climaxes here in the city where many of them originated. Shadowheart confronts her past at the House of Grief, where the truth about her stolen identity and imprisoned parents awaits. Asterion faces Cazador in the Vampire Lord's palace, where a dark ritual promises either ascension or another form of slavery. Gale must decide whether to obey Mistra's command to sacrifice himself, or find another path forward. Wyll discovers his father has been captured and must choose between his pact and his family. Karlach faces the reality that her failing engine means she must either return to Avernus or accept that her time is running out. Lae'zel confronts the full truth about Vlokith and must choose her allegiance. The city's politics add another layer of complexity. Gortash has positioned himself brilliantly as a hero, the man who can save Baldur's Gate from crisis. He's about to be crowned as an archduke, granted legitimate authority. He offers an alliance, suggesting cooperation against Orin and the Elder Brain while sharing power afterward. It's a tempting offer. Gortash is reasonable, intelligent, and makes good points about the need for order and security. He's also a tyrant who's orchestrated mass conversion of innocents into mind-controlled slaves. Working with him means compromising, and the question becomes, how much compromise crosses into complicity? Orin, meanwhile, has abducted one of the companions, holding them hostage. She wants a confrontation, wants to prove she's the superior chosen, worthier of Baal's favor than Catherick ever was. For anyone playing as the Dark Urge Origin, this becomes even more personal, as Orin is the one who scrambled their brain and stole their position as Baal's favorite. The confrontation with Orin happens in the Baal Temple beneath the city, a horrific place of blood and sacrifice. The battle can be fought directly, or for Dark Urge characters, there's the terrible temptation to reclaim the position as Baal's chosen. Either way, Orin's story ends here, consumed by her god or defeated by those she sought to destroy. With two of the three chosen dead, the balance of power over the Elder Brain shifts dramatically. Gortash, if he's survived this long, becomes desperate. The Emperor grows increasingly urgent in its warnings. The Elder Brain is getting harder to control. The crown of Karsus might not be enough to hold it much longer. The final sequence takes everyone back to the Mind Flayer colony, now expanding beneath Baldur's Gate. The Elder Brain has broken free of the Dead Three's control and is ascending, rising from the depths to transform the entire city. The beginning of mass ceremorphosis unfolds in the streets above. People clutch their heads as their tadpoles activate. Some resist. Some transform immediately. The city descends into nightmare. The final choice involves several possible paths forward. The Elder Brain can be destroyed outright, though this approach carries terrible risk. Its death throes might kill everyone infected with tadpoles. Alternatively, the Elder Brain could be dominated, taken control of along with all the true souls connected to it. This path requires either accepting the Emperor's offer of ceremorphosis, gaining the psychic power necessary to dominate the brain through transformation, or freeing Orpheus, the imprisoned Githyanki prince whose psychic power has been shielding the Githyanki from Mind Flayer domination, and using his strength instead. There's also the option to free the Elder Brain completely, removing the crown of Karsus and hoping it will simply leave peacefully. This proves to be catastrophically naive, leading to the Elder Brain conquering the world unopposed. One more choice emerges in these final moments. If Orpheus is freed, he's dying from his long imprisonment. He offers to sacrifice himself by becoming a Mind Flayer, using the transformation to gain the power needed to dominate the Elder Brain one final time, saving the city at the cost of his own identity. Alternatively, the protagonist can undergo ceremorphosis instead, transforming to gain ultimate psychic power and dominating the Elder Brain while saving everyone. Ceremorphosis destroys the original personality, but the Emperor insists enough of the original person will remain to make choices, to have agency. These final choices define how the story of Baldur's Gate 3 concludes. Saving the city while remaining unchanged, transforming into something that's no longer quite human, sacrificing a companion, working with or against the various factions that have been allied with throughout this journey. There's no perfect solution. Every path forward comes with costs that must be accepted. The shadow curse that blankets the lands around Moonrise Towers deserves deeper examination. This isn't just a magical hazard or environmental obstacle. It's the physical manifestation of one man's grief transforming an entire region into a place of perpetual death. Ctheric Thorm wasn't always a servant of Merkel. He was once a devout follower of Selûne, the moon goddess. He lived in the prosperous town of Rythwin with his wife and daughter, Isabel. Life was good. The town thrived. Ctheric was respected as both a leader and a faithful servant of his goddess. Then his wife died. The grief was profound, but Ctheric endured. He still had Isabel. He still had his faith. He still had purpose. Then Isabel died too. The details of her death vary in the telling, but the result was the same. Ctheric Thorm, a man who had devoted his life to a goddess of light and protection, found himself powerless to protect the person he loved most. His faith shattered. If Selûne couldn't or wouldn't save his daughter, what good was devotion? He turned to Shar first, Selûne's dark twin. The Lady of Loss offered what seemed like comfort, a philosophy that embraced grief rather than fighting it. Ctheric built a great temple to Shar, abandoned Selûne entirely, and tried to find peace in darkness. The town of Rythwin followed his lead, as towns often do when their leaders change faith. Selûnite temples were torn down. Sharan ones rose in their place. But Shar couldn't give him what he really wanted. Embracing loss meant accepting Isabel was gone. Ctheric couldn't accept that. He wanted his daughter back, and Shar had no interest in resurrection, only in making him accept the emptiness. So Ctheric went further. He found those who worshipped Merkel, the Lord of Bones. Death gods don't typically offer resurrection, but Merkel offered something else, a deal. Become my chosen, serve me absolutely, and your daughter can return. Not truly alive, but not truly dead either. A state of undeath, tethered to an artifact hidden in the Shadowfell. Ctheric accepted. He performed the rituals, made the sacrifices, bound himself to Merkel completely. And Isabel returned, though she wasn't the same. Her soul was trapped, tethered to her father's immortality. As long as Ctheric lived and served Merkel, Isabel would remain in this half-life. The pact came with a price beyond Isabel's condition. The land itself began to die. Darkness spread from Moonrise Towers like a stain. Plants withered. Animals fled or transformed into twisted undead things. The Shadowfell began bleeding into the material plane, creating a pocket of perpetual gloom where death held dominion. The town of Rythwin, once prosperous, became a ghost town in the most literal sense. Its citizens died or fled. Those who remained were transformed into shadows themselves, cursed spirits doomed to relive their final moments eternally. The shadow curse consumed everything. Harper forces tried to stop Ctheric. They laid siege to Moonrise Towers, fought a desperate battle to end his reign and lift the curse. They killed him, confirmed his death, celebrated their victory. Then he got back up. The Harpers didn't understand. They couldn't kill him permanently because his immortality was bound to the artifact in the Shadowfell containing Isabel's soul. As long as that remained intact, Ctheric would return. The Harpers were forced to retreat, their victory turned to bitter defeat. Many didn't survive the withdrawal. Those who did carried the memory of fighting an unkillable enemy. This history explains why the resistance fighters at last light and are so demoralized when the story reaches them a century later. They've been fighting Ctheric for so long, watching him die and return, watching their friends fall in battles that ultimately mean nothing. The only thing keeping them alive is Isabel herself, her divine magic protecting a small area from her father's curse, creating a bubble of light in the darkness he created. The irony is devastating. Ctheric cursed an entire region to keep his daughter by his side. Now his daughter uses her power to protect others from the curse he created, creating the very resistance that fights against him. She's become exactly what he feared losing, someone devoted to protecting life and fighting against death's unnatural grip on the world. Khazad-Zar's plans extend far beyond simple vampire politics. His ascension ritual is one of the most ambitious and horrific schemes in Baldur's Gate's hidden history. Khazad is old, even by vampire standards. He's been operating in Baldur's Gate for centuries. carefully building his power base while remaining hidden from most of the city's attention. The upper classes know there's a Tsar family with an old estate, but they don't realize what the family patriarch truly is. The ritual Cazador has been planning requires specific components. 7 vampire spawn, created at specific times under specific circumstances. These are his children, though he's never treated them as anything but property. Asterion is one of these 7, as are his siblings, Leon, Aurelia, Violet, Eusen, Petras, and Delaria. Each was carefully selected, turned at the precise astrological moment required by the ritual. But 7 spawn aren't enough. The ritual requires thousands of souls. Not just any souls either. They need to be souls of the spawn's victims, people personally brought to their deaths by the 7 spawn who will be sacrificed. For 200 years, Cazador has been forcing his spawn to lure victims back to his palace. Each victim's soul was captured, bound, stored in a magical prison in preparation for the ritual. Thousands upon thousands of souls, each representing someone who trusted the wrong beautiful stranger, someone who followed Asterion or one of his siblings into darkness, and never came back out. The spawn didn't want to do this. Vampiric compulsion made refusal impossible. When Cazador commanded them to hunt, they hunted. When he commanded them to lie, seduce, betray, they did. The mental torture was as bad as the physical. Each spawn retained enough of their original personality to feel guilt, shame, horror at what they were being forced to do. But they couldn't stop. Asterion remembers victims. He remembers their faces, their names, the moment they realized they'd been betrayed. He carries those memories like open wounds. For 2 centuries, he's been both perpetrator and victim, hurting others while being hurt himself, unable to break the cycle. The ritual chamber beneath Cazador's palace is a monument to obsession. Carved with infernal runes, powered by the captured souls, designed to channel an immense amount of dark power through a single moment of sacrifice. When the ritual is performed, the 7 spawn will be killed, their essence consumed. The thousands of captured souls will be destroyed, their life force fueling the transformation. And whoever completes the ritual will become a vampire ascendant, a being with all the powers of vampirism but none of the traditional weaknesses. No vulnerability to sunlight. No need for an invitation to enter homes. The ability to create spawn who are magically bound to serve. Immortality without the usual limitations. It's everything Cazador has wanted for centuries, and it's finally within his reach. Until Asterion escapes. Until the tadpole breaks the compulsion. Until his carefully laid plans are threatened by a spawn who's finally free enough to fight back. When the confrontation comes, Cazador is desperate in ways he's never been before. He's so close to ascension. He can taste it. The thought of losing everything to the spawn he's abused for 200 years drives him to increasingly reckless actions. He drops his usual careful facade and reveals the cruelty that's always been there, the same cruelty he inflicted on Asterion and the others every day of their existence under his control. The Githyanki society that Lae'zel has been raised in is built on lies that stretch back centuries. Understanding these lies requires understanding Githyanki history beyond what their people are told. When the Githyanki rebelled against the Mind Flayers and won their freedom, they were led by Mother Gith and her most trusted general, a warrior named Vlaakith. Not the current Vlaakith, but the first of that name. After the rebellion succeeded, Mother Gith sought alliance with Tiamat, the dragon goddess, to gain the power needed to establish the Githyanki as a dominant force. She left Vlaakith in charge during her absence. Mother Gith never returned from that meeting. What happened to her is unclear. Different stories circulate. Some say she ascended to godhood. Others whisper she was betrayed. The truth has been lost or deliberately hidden. What's certain is that Vlaakith took permanent control in Mother Gith's absence. She declared herself queen and established a reign that has lasted through multiple successors, each taking the name Vlaakith. The current Vlaakith is either Vlaakith the 157th, or something close to that number. depending on which historical records are accurate. Except that's also a lie. The current Vlachith isn't the 157th in a line of succession. She's the same Vlachith who took power after Mother Githa's disappearance. She's a lich, an undead sorcerer who's been ruling the Githyanki for over 1,000 years, maintaining power by consuming the souls of her most powerful warriors before they can grow strong enough to challenge her. The Githyanki have a tradition they view as a high honor. When a warrior reaches a certain level of power and accomplishment, they're summoned to an audience with Vlachith herself. This is supposed to be a moment of recognition, a chance to serve their queen directly, perhaps even to join her inner circle of advisors. It's an execution. Vlachith drains their soul, consuming their essence to maintain her own power and extend her unnatural lifespan. Every Githyanki who's ever been honored with an audience has died, their consciousness absorbed into Vlachith's being, their power stolen to fuel her immortality. The Githyanki military structure ensures this system's continuation. Warriors are taught absolute loyalty to Vlachith from hatching. They're conditioned to see her as divine, as the embodiment of Githyanki ideals. Questioning her is not just treason, it's philosophically impossible for most Githyanki to even conceive of. Lae'zel is a perfect product of this system. She's been trained since childhood to be a weapon, to value strength above all else, to see Vlachith as the highest authority. Her entire worldview is built on these foundations. When cracks appear in that worldview, when evidence suggests Vlachith isn't the benevolent god queen she claims to be, Lae'zel's psychological crisis is profound. The resistance movement opposing Vlachith centers around Orpheus, the legendary Githyanki prince and son of Mother Gith herself. Vlachith imprisoned him in the astral plane centuries ago, recognizing him as the greatest threat to her rule. If Orpheus were free and able to speak to the Githyanki people, her lies would be exposed. The people might rally to Mother Githa's actual bloodline rather than the lich who's been pretending to be her legitimate successor. So Vlachith keeps Orpheus in an impenetrable prison, uses his innate psychic powers to shield all Githyanki from mind flayer domination, making herself seem even more protective and necessary, and has spent centuries ensuring that any Githyanki who learns the truth is killed before they can spread that knowledge. The rebellion exists in secret, operating carefully, building strength in the shadows. They're waiting for the right moment, for the right circumstances, for a chance to free Orpheus and expose Vlachith's centuries of lies. Throughout the story of Baldur's Gate 3, that moment draws closer, and Lae'zel finds herself caught between her conditioning and the truth. Enver Gortash's transformation from street child to Bane's chosen is a story of ambition born from abandonment. He was born to working-class parents in Baldur's Gate's lower city. His parents ran a small shop, barely making ends meet. When Gortash was still a child, a warlock approached his parents with an offer. The warlock served an archdevil and needed servants. The family needed money. The transaction was simple: sell the boy, receive payment, never speak of it again. His parents accepted. Gortash spent his formative years in the Nine Hells, specifically in the House of Hope, a domain controlled by the Cambion Raphael. He wasn't treated as a child. He was property, bought and paid for, existing solely to serve his master's purposes. He learned infernal contracts, dark pacts, and the cruel hierarchies of Hell's social structure. But he also learned something else: how systems of control work. How fear and dependence can be weaponized. How to manipulate others into thinking their chains are security rather than slavery. He studied his captors' methods, internalizing their techniques while cultivating a burning hatred for the vulnerability that had allowed his parents to sell him. Eventually, Gortash escaped. The details are unclear, but he made it back to the material plane as a young man, brilliant and utterly ruthless. He had learned one lesson above all others: power is the only thing that matters. Not love, not family, not trust. Only power keeps you safe. Only control prevents betrayal. He started small, using his knowledge of infernal contracts and magical items to establish himself in Baldur's Gate's underworld. He traded in weapons, in secrets, in influence. He formed connections with the city's patriarchs, selling them security devices, surveillance tools, ways to protect their wealth and control their assets. The Steel Watch, an army of mechanical constructs that could patrol the streets and enforce order, was his masterpiece of public persuasion. Everyone wanted safety. Gortash promised to provide it. Bane noticed him. The god of tyranny saw in Gortash a perfect instrument, someone who understood control systems, who believed in order imposed through force, who had the intelligence to implement large-scale plans. Bane chose Gortash as his champion, granting him divine power in exchange for service. Gortash met with Catherick Thorm and the original Baal's chosen, who was none other than the being that would later become the Dark Urge after Orin's betrayal. Together, they conceived the absolute plot: steal the crown of Karsus, enslave an elder brain, create an army of true souls, and conquer the Sword Coast while positioning themselves to ascend to full godhood. The genius of Gortash's contribution was the infection method. Rather than force people to accept tadpoles, market them as blessings. Create a cult that offers power and purpose to the desperate. Make people beg for the parasite that will enslave them. It's more effective than any army because the victims participate willingly in their own subjugation. By the time the story reaches Baldur's Gate, Gortash has positioned himself as the city's savior. He's about to be crowned Archduke. The people trust him. They believe he can protect them from the crisis that he himself orchestrated. It's the ultimate expression of his worldview: create the problem, offer the solution, and use people's fear to justify absolute control. When confronted with the evil of his plan, Gortash doesn't deny it. He defends it. He genuinely believes that freedom is chaos, that people are too weak or stupid to govern themselves, that tyranny is the only thing standing between civilization and collapse. His childhood taught him that the strong exploit the weak, so he chose to be strong. His time in hell taught him that hierarchies are natural and necessary, so he chose to be at the top. In his mind, he's not a villain. He's the only person willing to do what's necessary. The fact that it involves enslaving thousands is just a cost he's willing to pay. After all, his parents taught him that people are commodities to be bought and sold. He's simply applying that lesson on a larger scale. Throughout the story of Baldur's Gate 3, a mysterious figure called the Emperor speaks in dreams. It appears as a powerful, confident human, offering guidance and protection. It claims to be shielding minds from the Elder Brain's control, working to help stop the Absolute. During the journey through the Shadow-Cursed lands, the Emperor reveals its true form. It's a mind flayer. This revelation raises immediate questions. Can a mind flayer be trusted? Aren't they the enemy? Is this some elaborate manipulation? The Emperor insists it's different from other illithids. It claims to have retained its sense of self after seramorphosis, to have broken free from Elder Brain control, to have lived for decades in Baldur's Gate as an independent agent working against more destructive mind flayers. And here's the thing, it might be telling the truth. The Emperor's real identity, discovered through investigation, is even more surprising. It's Balduran. Yes, that Balduran, the founder of Baldur's Gate, the legendary hero, the man whose statue stands in the city's center. Balduran didn't die in a glorious last adventure. He was captured by mind flayers during one of his voyages. He was subjected to seramorphosis. He transformed into an illithid. But somehow, some core of who he was survived the transformation. The new mind flayer retained Balduran's memories, his intelligence, his strategic mind. This mind flayer, this emperor, returned to Baldur's Gate and lived in secret for centuries, manipulating events from the shadows. It fought other mind flayers, prevented tadpole infections, and worked to keep the city safe in its own way. Not out of altruism, exactly, but because it saw Baldur's Gate as its home, its legacy. The question becomes, does this make the Emperor trustworthy? Is it still Balduran in any meaningful sense? Or is it a mind flayer using Balduran's memories to manipulate those it encounters? The story deliberately doesn't give a clear answer. The Emperor helps, genuinely helps. Its advice is usually sound. Its protection from the elder brain is real. But its motives are its own, and they don't necessarily align with those it's protecting. In the endgame, the Emperor pushes hard for seramorphosis, for others to become mind flayers as it did. It promises that identity can be retained, that seramorphosis doesn't have to mean death of self, that incredible power can be gained while remaining fundamentally the same person. Is it lying? Or does it genuinely believe this because it's projecting its own experience? Maybe it really did retain enough of Baldur to believe it's still him. But that doesn't mean the same would be true for others. This ambiguity is deliberate. The story wants this decision to be difficult, wants the struggle of wondering if the Emperor is a tragic figure trying to help or a manipulator using desperation against those it claims to protect. Another major revelation involves Orpheus, the legendary Githyanki prince. The Githyanki believe Orpheus led their rebellion against the Mind Flayers alongside Mother Gith. They believe he ascended to some higher plane, watching over them. It's a comforting myth that supports Vlakith's rule. She claims to be Orpheus's heir, ruling in his stead until his prophesied return. The truth is darker. Vlakith imprisoned Orpheus in the astral plane centuries ago. She saw him as a threat to her power and locked him away, then used his innate psychic abilities to shield all Githyanki from Mind Flayer domination. She's essentially using him as a living shield without his consent. The Emperor admits that it's been using Orpheus's power as well. The protection from the elder brain that certain individuals have experienced comes partly from the Emperor's efforts, but mostly from Orpheus's psychic shielding, redirected to protect specific people. This creates a moral dilemma. If Orpheus is freed, the Githyanki people might finally be free to choose their own destiny without Vlakith's tyranny. But freeing him might also remove protection from the elder brain. The Emperor strongly discourages this path. If Orpheus is freed, he proves to be noble, intelligent, and genuinely devoted to his people. He's everything Vlakith isn't. He offers to help stop the elder brain, even though he has no reason to trust those who freed him. But he's also dying. Centuries of imprisonment have taken their toll. He's willing to undergo seramorphosis to gain the psychic power needed to dominate the elder brain one last time, sacrificing his identity to save both the material plane and the Githyanki people. This choice, to free Orpheus or trust the Emperor, is one of the story's most difficult moral decisions. Both paths have merit and costs. Orin the Red's backstory reveals the horrific reality of being born into a murder cult with no chance at a normal life. She wasn't adopted into Baal's cult or converted as an adult. She was born into it, literally bred for murder. Her mother was a Baal spawn, carrying divine essence of the murder god. Her father was a devoted cultist. From the moment of her birth, Orin's destiny was decided. She would be a perfect instrument of Baal's will, shaped and molded from infancy to see murder as the highest form of art. The cult raised her in the depths beneath Baldur's Gate, in the temple where blood flows in rivers and every surface is dedicated to death. She was taught to kill before she learned to read. She was encouraged to see violence not as necessary evil or unfortunate necessity, but as beautiful, sacred, worthy of devotion. No human mind can withstand that kind of upbringing and remain whole. Orin's instability isn't a character flaw. It's the inevitable result of a childhood spent learning that love is expressed through murder, that approval comes through creative violence, that her worth as a person is measured in how artistically she can kill. She became obsessed with perfection in murder. Each kill had to be more creative, more shocking, more artistic than the last. She developed the ability to shape-shift, taking on other forms to get close to victims. She carved out niches of flesh and wore them. She became something that could barely be called human anymore. But she was never Baal's favorite. That position belonged to another, someone who would later become known as the Dark Urge. This sibling, this rival, was the true chosen. Orin was secondary, always striving to prove herself worthy, always falling short in her god's eyes. The jealousy festered. It grew. It consumed her. Eventually, she snapped. She attacked her sibling, scrambling their brain, leaving them for dead. With the original chosen out of the way, Orin seized the position for herself. She became Baal's new favorite, the new leader of the cult. But she never stopped doubting. Never stopped wondering if she was truly worthy. Every murder is a prayer asking for validation from a god who sees her as second best. Every victim is a desperate attempt to prove she deserves the title she stole. When she abducts someone close to those fighting the Absolute, when she demands a confrontation, she's not just trying to eliminate threats to the Dead Three's plan. She's trying to prove something to herself, to her god, to everyone. She needs to demonstrate that she's the superior killer, that she deserves to be Baal's chosen. For Dark Urge characters, the confrontation with Orin becomes deeply personal. She's the reason for the amnesia, the reason for starting over. She's also a mirror, showing what the Dark Urge might have become if they'd never been given the chance to forget, to become someone else. Orin is a victim of abuse by a deity, shaped into a weapon before she could develop a real personality. But she's also a monster who's killed hundreds, who revels in suffering, who sees other people as canvas for her art. The story doesn't ask for forgiveness or redemption for Orin. She's beyond that. But it does reveal how thoroughly someone can be destroyed by the circumstances of their birth and upbringing. The mysterious artifact that's been protecting you, the object Shadowheart was so desperate to protect in the opening, is called the Astral Prism. It's a Githyanki artifact containing a pocket dimension where Orpheus has been imprisoned. The Emperor has been hiding inside this prison with Orpheus, using the artifact's properties to shield you from the Elder Brain, while also keeping Orpheus contained. When Shadowheart was given the artifact to protect, she had no idea what it really was, just that it was crucial to some larger plan. The Dead Three wanted to use the prism as part of their scheme, but the Emperor had other ideas. It's been playing its own game, using you as a piece on the board while also genuinely trying to stop the Absolute. Understanding the truth about the prism ties together many plot threads. Why Vlokith is so desperate to get it back, she wants to keep Orpheus imprisoned, why the Emperor is so protective of it, it's his hiding place, and why the Dead Three were searching for it, they wanted to use Orpheus's power to strengthen their control over the Elder Brain. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't exist in isolation. It's set in a world with thousands of years of history, woven with references to events from D&D lore and previous adventures in this setting. The descent of Eltro, which created the refugee crisis in Baldur's Gate, was detailed in the Descent into Avernus adventure. An entire city was dragged into the Nine Hells by Zariel, and while it was eventually freed, the trauma and destruction left thousands homeless and desperate. Jahaira's presence connects directly to the original Baldur's Gate stories. She's older now, maybe a bit more cynical, but still fighting the good fight. For those familiar with those earlier adventures, seeing her again is a powerful moment of connection to the past. The Baalspawn saga, the central plot of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, is directly referenced. The Dark Urge is essentially a new Baalspawn, created after Baal's resurrection. The terrible things that happened in those stories are history now, but they left scars on the world. Minsk and Boo also return, yes really. This ranger and his miniature giant space hamster were beloved companions in the original adventures. Now they're back, slightly confused by the passage of time with a complex explanation involving being petrified for a century, but still ready to kick evil in the butt. The Netherese Empire's fall is ancient history by this timeline. It happened about 1,700 years before these events. But its artifacts persist, its ruins still dot the landscape, and its greatest mistake, Karsus's folly, still influences how magic works in the entire world. The endings of Baldur's Gate 3 vary dramatically based on choices made throughout the story, but several threads remain consistent across most outcomes. The Absolute is stopped, one way or another. It can be destroyed, dominated, or in the worst-case scenario, it breaks free and must be dealt with through other means. Baldur's Gate either survives relatively intact or suffers devastating damage depending on how quickly the threat is addressed, and which choices are made during the final confrontation. The companions face the consequences of their choices in different ways. Shadowheart either becomes a dark justiciar, fully embracing Shar's darkness, or she rejects the Lady of Loss and potentially rescues her parents from the House of Grief, reclaiming her true identity. Astarion either completes the Ascension ritual and becomes a vampire ascendant with terrible power but corrupted soul, or he remains a spawn but truly free, choosing not to perpetuate the cycle of abuse that destroyed him. Gale might sacrifice himself as Mr. Commanded, make peace with being mortal and finding worth beyond divine approval, or claim divine power for himself using the crown of Karsus. Wyl's fate varies between remaining bound to Mazora's pact, finally breaking free from his infernal contract, or taking his father's place as the new Duke of Baldur's Gate. Karlach faces perhaps the most bittersweet ending, either returning to Avernus where the heat will stabilize her engine but she'll lose her freedom again, dying as her engine finally fails but free on the material plane, or in some endings finding temporary stability that buys her more time. Lae'zel either remains loyal to Vlaakith despite everything she's learned, joins Orpheus's rebellion to free her people from tyranny, or strikes out on her own path entirely separate from Githyanki politics. The protagonist's fate depends heavily on the path chosen. Some endings see the tadpole removed and freedom restored, allowing continued adventuring across Faerun. Others involve transformation into a mind flayer, gaining immense power but losing humanity in the process. Dark paths lead to ascension to some form of greater power, particularly for Dark Urge characters who embrace Baal. Some endings require ultimate sacrifice to save the city. And in quieter endings, the protagonists might fade into peaceful obscurity, their heroic deeds known only to a few. The story has over a dozen major ending variations and countless minor ones based on choices made throughout. This is truly a story that's different for each person who experiences it. One of the fascinating things about Baldur's Gate 3's lore is how it weaves together grand, cosmic stories with deeply personal ones. The narrative deals with mind flayer invasions and dead gods trying to reclaim divinity. But it's also about a woman recovering her stolen memories, a man trying to escape an abusive relationship, and someone finding peace with impending death. The story argues that these narratives are equally important. Saving the world matters, but so does saving one person. Grand historical forces shape events, but individuals can push back, can make choices that change destinies. This is fundamentally optimistic storytelling, even when the content is dark. The presence of choice, the possibility of growth, the potential for redemption weave through everything. Yes, terrible things happen. Yes, people are broken by their experiences. But healing is possible. Change is possible. Not easy. Not without cost. But possible. We've traveled from the dawn of creation to the streets of Baldur's Gate. From cosmic battles between goddesses to the intimate struggles of individuals trying to be good in a complicated world. From the fall of ancient empires to the rise of new threats. This is the lore of Baldur's Gate 3. Not just a list of facts and dates, but a tapestry of interconnected stories about power, identity, choice, and consequence. The Mind Flayer tadpole isn't just a plot device. It's a manifestation of all the ways we're changed by our experiences, all the ways trauma and transformation threaten our sense of self. The Absolute isn't just a villain to defeat. It's a representation of how easy it is to be controlled when desperate, when afraid, when someone offers simple answers to complex problems. The companions aren't just allies in a struggle. They're people wrestling with fundamental questions. Who am I? What defines me? Can I change what I've been? Can I be better than my past? And the world itself, Faerun, with its fallen empires and risen gods, its scars from ancient catastrophes and its potential for new hope, reminds us that history matters, that choices echo through time, that what happens today becomes the lore that tomorrow's adventurers will study. This is why Baldur's Gate 3's story resonates. It's not just about mind flayers and magical artifacts. It's about fundamental human experiences. About being afraid of losing ourselves. About trying to be good when it's hard. About finding meaning in a chaotic world. About choosing who we want to be. For adventurers experiencing this story for the first time, for lore enthusiasts diving deep into Forgotten Realms history, or for anyone who simply loves a good story, these themes connect us all. The choices made throughout this narrative matter. The person someone chooses to be matters. And the story of Baldur's Gate 3 extends beyond its characters and world. It becomes part of everyone who experiences it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lore of Baldur's Gate 3. If this helped you understand the story's rich history and themes, consider sharing it with fellow adventurers. And remember, the weave connects us all. Good night, and good adventuring.